For more than half a century, the United States stood like a giant over Asia. Its warships roamed the Pacific. Its embassies shaped policy. Its corporations dictated growth. Its dollar funded everything from airports to elections. People in Asia feared American power, respected it, even admired it. But today, that power is unraveling, not with a bang, but with silence. You might not see it on CNN. You won't hear it at Davos. But across capitals, classrooms, and construction sites in Asia, the collapse of U.S. influence has already begun. And it's not because America got weaker. It's because Asia got smarter. Smarter in how it trades. Smarter in how it partners. Smarter in how it protects its own voice. I've seen it with my own eyes. From Singapore to New Delhi, from Jakarta to Riyadh, nations are no longer waiting for American permission to grow. They're building their future. And they're building it without Washington. Let's be clear. This isn't anti-American. It's post-American. Asia is not rebelling. Asia is evolving. And the United States still thinks it's the center of gravity, still believes it can control the chessboard, still expects respect for decisions it made 50 years ago. But let me tell you something. In Asia, respect is not inherited. It is earned daily, visibly, with value. And that's where America has failed. Let's go back. For decades, the U.S. positioned itself as Asia's protector. Military bases in Japan, Korea, Philippines. Trade agreements with Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia. Influence in ASEAN, in the UN, in the World Bank. But what did many Asian nations really experience? Loans with heavy strings. Lectures on human rights while weapons flowed quietly. Cultural intrusion masked as soft power. Political manipulation behind smiling diplomacy. America offered security, yes, but it demanded obedience in return. That worked for a while, but no longer. Because today's Asia is young, digital, ambitious, and deeply proud of its identity. It no longer wants to be told what freedom looks like. It wants to define it on its own terms. And while the U.S. talks about democracy and rules-based order, it continues to act as if Asia is a junior partner. That condescension is now being rejected quietly, powerfully. You can feel it. In the new Indo-Pacific trade deals that exclude the U.S. In the pivot to Chinese infrastructure instead of U.S. aid. In the increasing preference for local partnerships over distant alliances. And the West doesn't see it. Because they're still thinking in military maps. Still counting ships and bases. Still analyzing satellite images. But Asia's shift is not military, it's emotional. Let me explain. There was a time when being aligned with the US gave you prestige. Now, being too close to America raises suspicion. People ask you, are we being used? Are we being watched? Will our culture be diluted? Will our economy be reshaped for foreign gain? This is the collapse, not of missiles, but of trust. And when trust collapses, power goes with it. Let me give you a real example. In 2005, America was the dominant external power in Southeast Asia. By 2025, its influence will have dropped by more than half, according to every regional poll. Not because it lost its weapons, but because it lost its respect. While America focused on policing the world, China focused on building roads. While America debated sanctions, India invested in digital IDs for 1 billion people. While America asked for loyalty, Asia started asking, what do we actually get in return? And when that question enters the national conversation, you've already lost the room. Now let's go even deeper. Do you know why many Asian nations are now joining BRICS-SCO and other regional coalitions? Because they want voice without interference. They want growth without lectures. They want innovation without foreign ownership. And America, it still believes money equals influence. But that equation no longer works. Because today, Asia has money. Asia has markets. Asia has minds. What it no longer has is patience for old power. And here's the final point I'll make in this part. The US didn't lose influence in Asia because of one war or one president. It lost influence because it never updated its playbook. It forgot that Asia has changed. And in doing so, it became yesterday's friend, useful in the past, but no longer necessary for the future. Now, let's look at what's replacing American influence in Asia. It's not one country. It's not one alliance. It's a web, strong, quiet, and expanding. Because while the US was trying to dominate the region, Asia was learning to collaborate within itself. And today, that regional cooperation is turning into a force the West can no longer control. Let me explain how. Start with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, once treated as a minor regional bloc. Today, it's a central hub of trade, diplomacy, and digital strategy. It's working with China on rail corridors, with Japan on smart cities, with India on data systems, all at the same time. And notice what's missing. The US Washington is no longer the go-to partner. It's an observer, invited out of politeness, not necessity. Now consider RCEP, the world's largest trade agreement. 15 Asia-Pacific nations, covering 1/3 of the global population. And the US, nowhere in it. Meanwhile, China is expanding its Belt and Road Initiative. But don't just think roads and ports. Think fiber optic cables, energy grids, satellite networks, fintech partnerships, and e-commerce corridors, all designed to bind Asia to Asia. India, too, is rising, but with a different playbook. It's not trying to mimic the West or confront China directly. It's building a third path, digital diplomacy, cultural influence, and strategic autonomy. India's Unified Payments Interface, IUPI, is now being adopted by countries from the UAE to Singapore. Its digital public infrastructure model is being exported as a blueprint for inclusive development. You think that's just technology? No, that's soft power. The kind that changes behavior without needing a single soldier. Now, let's talk currency. The dollar was once king in Asia. Now, it's being quietly dethroned. Bilateral trade in rupees, yuan, ringgit, baht, and one is becoming normal. Central banks across Asia are reducing dollar reserves. BRICS is preparing a new reserve currency, and many Asian nations are watching closely or preparing to join. Even once, loyal partners are hedging. South Korea, investing heavily in China while remaining publicly aligned with the US Philippines, welcoming Chinese investment despite tensions in the South China Sea. Thailand, quietly shifting trade priorities toward ASEAN and India. This is what I call strategic drift, not dramatic, not declared, but decisive. Because when a nation stops choosing you by default, you've already lost your dominance. The US doesn't see this. It's still counting bases, defense contracts, and diplomatic handshakes, but what it's not counting is the shift in loyalty. Asia no longer wants an external sheriff. It wants regional leadership rooted in shared culture, values, and challenges. That's why the US is struggling. Its approach is still rooted in the Cold War. Divide and rule, contain and pressure. But Asia today is too connected, too informed, too confident to be divided by fear. Look at how Asian youth see the world now. They consume more K-dramas than Hollywood movies. They follow regional influencers more than Western politicians. They buy from local platforms instead of Amazon. They use TikTok Shopee, Flipkart, not just Instagram and Google. Cultural identity is being reclaimed. Digital sovereignty is being asserted. That's the real collapse, not on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of the next generation. And here's something even deeper. Asia is remembering its own greatness. Before colonization, before Cold War alliances, before Western economic models, for thousands of years, Asia led the world in trade, science, medicine, philosophy, and spiritual influence. And now, that memory is returning. Asian leaders no longer sit at the back of Western meetings hoping to be acknowledged. They now host their own and expect the world to come to them. G20 in India, BRICE in South Africa, Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. This is the new stage. And the US, sometimes it's not even on the guest list, because Asia is building something beyond American vision. It's building a region where no one needs to ask the West what to do anymore. And once that confidence becomes culture, there is no turning back. The West thought Asia needed direction, but Asia needed something else entirely: respect. Let's talk honestly. For decades, the United States approached Asia like a parent teaching a child. Here's how to run a democracy. Here's how to liberalize your economy. Here's how to be more like us. And for a while, that tone was tolerated because Asia was still catching up. It needed capital, technology, security. But what America never realized is that dignity has a memory. And now, that memory is fueling a quiet rebellion. Not with protests, not with wars, but with decisions. Decisions to sign infrastructure deals with China instead of America. To expand 5G with Hawaii, not Cisco. To fund tech startups in Jakarta, not Silicon Valley. To send students to Singapore, not Stanford. These are not anti-Western moves. They are post-Western realities. Asia is not turning away from America with anger. It's simply moving forward without asking. And this is where America's blind spot becomes dangerous, not to Asia, but to itself. The US still believes influence comes from talking the loudest. But today's Asia respects those who listen the deepest. Let me give you an example. When China visits an Asian nation with a development plan, it shows up with engineers, planners, cultural translators, people who sit down and say, "How can we build something with you?" When America shows up, it brings consultants, military advisors, and an agenda. That difference in approach is everything. One side says, "We trust you." The other says, "We'll help you, but only if you play by our rules." That's the collapse. It's emotional, not economic. It's not about GDP. It's about genuine connection. And the US has lost that. Let's go even deeper. Infrastructure. In today's world, roads are power. Cables are control. Satellites are sovereignty. America used to dominate these, but now. China is building ports in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Indonesia. India is launching payment systems in the Gulf and Africa. ASEAN is discussing cross-border fiber links and AI development with no American fingerprints. Why? Because infrastructure is trust in physical form. And the West is no longer seen as a trustworthy builder. Too many promises, too many lectures, too many delays. While America talks about transparency, Asia is building trains. While the West debates environmental reviews, Asia is laying power cables. While America analyzes risks, Asia takes action. This is what I call the trust velocity gap. The West moves with caution. Asia moves with confidence. And in a fast world, confidence wins. Now let's talk about something even more powerful than roads or trade culture. American soft power once ruled Asia. Hollywood, Harvard, MTV, McDonald's. It was attractive. It was addictive. But now, Asian youth are building their own culture. Listening to BTS, watching Thai dramas, following Malaysian influencers, using Indian apps. K-pop stars are now global icons. Anime is dominating streaming platforms. Asian languages are trending on TikTok. This is not a trend. It's a transition. Asia is falling in love with itself again. And when people stop seeing the West as the standard of success, the balance of power collapses. Because influence is not about controlling policies. It's about shaping aspiration. And today's Asian youth don't want to move west. They want to build east. That dream is the real revolution. Let me leave you with one final thought in this chapter. Power doesn't die in battle. It dies in irrelevance. The US didn't lose influence in Asia because it was defeated. It lost it because it refused to evolve. While Asia changed its language, its posture, its partnerships, America stayed frozen in a Cold War mirror, talking about freedom and democracy, without realizing that freedom now has a local flavor, and democracy is no longer Western by default. Asia is not rejecting those values. It is redefining them. And that's what America never prepared for, a world that still wants peace, progress, and prosperity, just not the Western way. There was a time when the United States didn't just project power. It claimed the moral high ground. It said, "We are the defenders of freedom." It said, "We protect human rights, democracy, and law." And for many nations in Asia, those words carried weight. But over time, words stopped being enough because people see everything now. They saw America invade nations in the name of peace. They saw drone strikes justified as defense. They saw chaos in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, then silence. Asia watched, and Asia remembered. Let's be honest, moral authority is no longer America's currency in this region. Not after Guantanamo. Not after double standards on climate, trade, and war. Not after decades of telling Asian nations how to behave while ignoring its own contradictions. So today, when the US lectures Asia about democracy, it lands differently, not as inspiration, but as interference. Meanwhile, look what Asia is building in response. A new diplomatic order based not on morality, but on mutual respect. Let's take a closer look. In the past, diplomacy in Asia meant looking west. Now, it means looking across. China and India, once rivals, now sit in the same rooms. Japan and South Korea, once hesitant, now share economic goals. Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, all creating their own strategic alignments, not waiting for US approval. What's forming is not another bloc. It's something more powerful, multipolar confidence. Asia is learning that it doesn't need a dominant voice anymore. It needs many strong voices, each speaking from history, from culture, from lived experience. This is how power in Asia now moves, not from center to periphery, but from network to network. And that's something the US can't compete with, because America still thinks in terms of top-down control. But Asia is now horizontal, collaborative, adaptive. That's why US influence is collapsing here. Not in headlines, but in decision-making rooms. When a country like Bangladesh chooses to finance a deep seaport with Chinese backing, that's not rebellion. That's strategic clarity. When Thailand turns to South Korea for advanced chip design, that's not anti-American. That's smart hedging. When Saudi Arabia joins BRICS talks, that's not betrayal. That's the future speaking through action. The United States sees these moves as threats, but they are symptoms of irrelevance, because influence doesn't disappear overnight. It drains away quietly until one day you realize You're no longer in the room where it happens. Let me tell you a story. In 2001, I visited a regional tech summit in Asia. Every major decision needed American approval. All slides were in English. All ideas centered on Western standards. 20 years later, I went back. The slides were in Mandarin, Hindi, Bahasa. The platforms discussed were local, the ambitions, global. But the permission, no longer needed. That's collapse. It doesn't make noise, it makes new rules. Now let's talk about people. In every Asian capital today, you will find something remarkable. Young entrepreneurs no longer applying for US visas, but for government innovation grants at home. Top students choosing local universities and staying to build. Leaders fluent in regional trade systems, not just IMF lingo. This generation of Asians sees the West not as a dream, but as just one version of success. Not better, not worse, just different. And that shift in mindset, it's irreversible. The US still tries to win Asia's mind share with aid packages and defense offers. But Asia wants collaboration, not control. Let's be very clear, Asia respects power, but it rejects arrogance. America's failure was not having influence. It was misusing it, projecting superiority instead of empathy, offering protection while demanding obedience. But the world doesn't want obedience anymore. It wants dignity. Asia is claiming that now, through trade, through voice, through silence. And America, it doesn't know how to respond to silence. Because silence means you're no longer needed. That is the most dangerous collapse of all. Let me speak plainly now. I am not against the United States. I have done business there. I have friends there. I respect its spirit of innovation, its resilience, its energy. But I am also a son of Asia, and I see what is changing. Clearly, quietly, powerfully, and I want you to see it too. The collapse of US influence in Asia is not a failure of strength. It's a failure of understanding, of humility, of adaptation, and most of all, a failure to respect that every region grows in its own way. For too long, America believed Asia needed saving. But Asia never needed saving. It needed space to evolve, to make mistakes, to find its rhythm, to lead, not just follow. And now that leadership is here. It's not loud. It's not always organized. But it is rooted. It is rising. And it will not stop. Because you cannot stop a region that is no longer chasing anyone. You cannot stop a culture that has begun to love its own reflection. You cannot stop a generation that has discovered its own power. Asia is not trying to replace the West. It is simply trying to be itself, without judgment, without shame, without permission. That is the future. Now let me offer some personal advice, especially to those of you over 45 watching this who feel the world changing too fast. Don't fear this shift. Understand it. Don't try to bring back the old world. Help build the new one with wisdom, not ego. Because every civilization has its moment, and the West had its time. It gave much to the world, and still can. But now it must learn something it has rarely practiced, letting others lead. That's hard. But it's necessary. If you're a business leader, stop planning only around Washington. Start listening to Jakarta, to Hanoi, to Dhaka, to Seoul. If you're an investor, don't just look for profit. Look for respect, for relevance, for long-term trust. If you're an educator, teach not just American success stories, but Asian innovation, African genius, Latin American resilience. The world is not becoming anti-West. It is becoming post-West. And that is not a threat. It is an invitation. An invitation to finally meet as equals. To build not from dominance, but from dignity. And now I speak directly to America. You had your era. You shaped so much of the modern world.